So sorry. So let's start, save your Q&A for that section. And then I'm glad you all got to read the agenda while I got dropped. So let's start with some questions about you. So this will go pretty fast. So I want to know about you, and partly, let's go to the slide about my cultural journey. I was raised in a very monocultural setting and semi-rural, and lived in New York, DC, lots of cities. I've learned a lot about different cultures and many aspects of culture. So my point is just, if I can learn this, you can learn this, if there's anything you need to know. So next slide, please. So first we're going to start with, what does this mean? Because this is where I feel a lot of organizations get tripped up. Everyone's talking about something different. So I want to go over what I find are the key questions that people are grappling with. And they often center around the idea that DEI means different things to different people. Next. So first I want to talk about, you have this challenge of, you're going to have to, you've decided, Amoeba's decided to raise the bar. And a lot of people tell me that DEI feels like the gentleman on the left, when in fact, the way you'll make progress is through collaboration. And that's why this roundtable is so great. And next. So these are the goals that I kind of lay out for people, that maybe, maybe not in the next 25 minutes, but that you understand the challenges around DEI, and including the fact that this is not a goal for everyone. And that's part of the resistance you run into that isn't spoken. That maybe you want to learn to be an effective ally. Don't waste time reinventing the wheel. Maybe you feel like you live in an area where you don't have a lot of people who can help you. The next point, build a community of practice. But I want to hear from you in the chat. Any other goals that you have, maybe not from today, but also today, but in general, why are you on this roundtable? What are you interested in? Okay, and so keep those notes to yourself. And then I want to know, just shout out here, number 1, 2, or 3, or put it in the chat. The next slide is, I want to find out, where are you coming from? What is your geographical location? Is it small town? Is it rural? Is it urban or city? Can you put in a 1, 2, or 3 in the chat so we can get an idea of, basically, rough idea of demographics?
And Jessica did mention that she was interested in making connections to grow a more diverse, inclusive board of directors. So I appreciate that. And people are talking about, we've got a pretty, we've got rural, semi-rural, we've got 2 people from urban areas, 3 people from urban. And so Rebecca's kind of 3, but teaching to call choices. So we got mostly from urban, 1 from small town, and 1 from kind of in the middle, rural, semi-rural.
Great,
And then,
thank you.
Yep.
So I'm just going to answer that question. Next slide, please. Right about the board, with one word: relationships. By building relationships, you will be planting the seeds for having more diverse interaction and engagement. And so the second question is a little deeper. I want to know, are you here, or, and it could be both, is this for facing inward to your staff and your community, or is this facing outward? Is it an internal or an external goal for you? So I know you're on the round table because you have a goal for the entire amoeba to do this, but just when you're thinking about DEI, I want you to think about, is this so I can get more customers? and live in a community with more harmony? Or is my first priority working with the people in my business, staff? So just, I want to hang that out there as something to think about, because when a topic is really large, it's easy to get overwhelmed. Putting challenges in those two buckets are really important, because there is some intersectionality, but there will be different challenges and different solutions. And next. So I want you to not share with me, but I want you to write down or just say to yourself, when I say, hey, let's talk about DEI, do you feel comfortable? Are you confused? Do you feel uncomfortable? Or are you annoyed? All of those answers are legitimate. So be honest with yourself. No one's going to know, but think about that a second, because that's going to tell you something about how you approach the topic. And next. So here are some, I'm just going to give you some background information about assumptions that people make. So Jen, do you want to read these for me?
DEI is mostly about race and ethnicity. Everyone should celebrate diversity. Low racial diversity equals racist bad people. It's better to do nothing than to make a mistake. We should get to 100% agreement about DEI or something else.
Right. Do you want to put some of the assumptions that you have or that you hear in the chat? Or just shout them out? I think we have a small enough group. Okay, and next. So here's some definitions that I find really helpful when people are talking about DEI. And I've done this presentation for national groups and nonprofits and just a lot of different types of organizations. So I'm really generalizing here, but I am using diversity, the definition of diversity from the Gates Foundation, and they know their stuff, a broad array of differences in identity, skill, perspective, and styles. I'll add to that, and I can send to you a handout on the ways that diversity breaks down. It's either primary or secondary. Primary things that are innate to your person that you can't change, and secondary are things that can change throughout your life or through your actions. In a nutshell, that's what diversity is. But diversity just means it's a lot. And the fact is that we have a lot more diverse culture and society in the United States than we have had ever before in the history of our country. So if you are challenged, it's not surprising. This is new information. Second, equity. And I like to clarify that while equity is a personal issue, generally, when we talk about equity in a field of work, we're talking about a systems or organizational issue, which takes it from the individual to something much bigger. So changing your individual behavior is very different from changing systems and organizations. So keep that in mind. But this is equity is a process of redistributing resources to compensate for unfair past practices with a goal of reaching equality. Not to go too deep, but I find people do not know the difference between equality and equity, for one. And I also find that people a lot of people I'm working with make an assumption that equity and equality are desirable goals, when in fact, I don't think they are, or we would have reached them by now. So if you're meeting resistance with people in your DEI work, whether it's at a personal or systems level, keep that in mind. inclusion used to mean about handicapped and ability, but it's now being used more to mean cultural inclusion, which is an environment that actively welcomes, connects, and values all while harming none. Now, I've added an A because I know that you, if you have a business, you have to meet some accessibility requirements. So right now in different sectors, and sectors make a big difference in how these words are thrown around, accessibility means designing or planning that reduces barriers for disabled and neurodiverse people. In the field I'm in, the bar is so high right now, we're having to change, because I work with state governments, we're having to change the way we design our presentations to include accessibility accommodations. And that's a pretty big lift. So, you know, you may all be doing some version of that. But my point is, this is a window into DEI for some people. So the second A is something that I'm interested in, is reducing the rural-urban divide through equitable distribution of nonprofit and government-funded sources. So that's something I speak on and train on as well. So as you can see, DEI is a really big umbrella, and we throw a lot of ideas and actions under it. So I want you to be aware that when I'm talking about DEI to someone, they may have a whole different idea based on their experience and their knowledge. I'm just trying to kind of create a level playing field here of terminology, hopefully that's useful to you. And can I have the next slide, please? And Jen, I'm counting on you to be my timekeeper too. So I think I'm on time, but
you are. You're great.
So again, a lot of people say equity, and they actually, you know, maybe they mean social justice, maybe they don't. But I want people to think about, well, okay, what are some other kinds of equity that people are talking about? So race and ethnicity is the biggest in the US. And then something we don't talk about much, which is directly linked, is class or socioeconomics, gender, age, geography, and sexual identity. These are kind of the top ones, not necessarily that we're talking about, but that I see impacting the most, the largest demographics. So put in the chat there if there's some other aspects of equity that you're really focused on. And it doesn't mean that to the exclusion of the pyramid you see on your right. It just means that that's kind of your window into this huge topic. So that's how I want you to think about it. It's like, if I'm into housing equity, that's what gets me out of bed every day, and I'm going to fight for my whole life for that. That doesn't mean that I'm not interested in racial equity. It just means that this is what I'm focused on. Because I think we are most effective when we're very specific and we try to solve manageable issues for us and ones that we care about. Any questions about this slide? Anything you want to add to it?
We do have one comment.
Yeah.
Feeling a little uncomfortable with this particular graphic. I don't believe it is entirely possible to silo these topics in this way. I don't think it's what you intend, but it's worth thinking about the specific connections between things like gender and race.
I agree totally. I just wanted to, and you know, I will make people uncomfortable. I understand. I just wanted to try to sort this so that into the biggest chunks, because I lose people when we talk about aspects of equity that don't impact most people. So thank you for that feedback, and I'll think about that. I do take risks, and I often make people a little unhappy. So that's okay. That's part of this work. I appreciate you respectfully calling me on that. And so let's move to the next one. Hopefully it won't make you uncomfortable. So I'm not going to go into a lot about the increasing diversity, take my word for it, but you probably in your own experience know that the USA is increasingly younger, especially multiracial, bilingual, increasingly urban, as is that trend is global. Spanish is the #1 second language as opposed to Western European languages in the past. Pay attention to regional differences, and newer immigrants are from Asia, South Asia, Latin America, and MENA cultures and countries, Middle Eastern, North African. So that's, straight up pretty much based on US Census data and immigration trends. So one thing I want to point out here is that Pew does excellent research on all of these issues around inclusion, and they consistently find that young people, regardless of their political affiliation, are much more liberal or accepting of LGBTQ. They tend to align more with social justice issues, even if their political views are otherwise. So keep your focus somewhat on younger markets, because that's where the most shift is happening. Boomers are not changing their attitudes a whole lot, as some of you may know firsthand. Next, please. So that's my whole point is, people say, I don't want to deal with this, this doesn't relate to me. I don't understand, if you're in the marketplace, how DEI doesn't relate to you, because younger people are not having this discrimination. And I mean, overall, they are voting as consumers with their feet, and they want, even if they're not gay or LGBT, they want to see an LGBT friendly business. So, you can stick your head in the sand, or you can learn the skills and try to be part of a movement that is being more inclusive. There will always be people who don't want to be, they're not interested. They don't ever want to talk about these things. Fine, somebody else is their competitor will. So I don't think we have a choice to become more savvy about DEI. And my whole premise in my business is start where you are. There's no, so next slide. We don't have, there's no reason to think, oh, I'm a white male, I can't do anything. Nonsense. You're a white male, you can do a lot. So everybody has something they can do if they care about helping to create a more inclusive society and marketplace. At the same time, I want to give you an example. I am a digital immigrant. I am not a digital native. I have to rely on the patience of people who are digital natives to help me learn your world. I'm not very good at it. So I really appreciate it when I'm not judged too harshly for not knowing how to negotiate in the digital landscape. And Carl Rogers, famous educator, said, it's hard to take in information that's against your own beliefs. So I am in no way apologizing for people being racist, sexist, misogynist, Islamophobic, ugly, disrespectful in any way. At the same time, I like to make an assumption that I often find true. If people are not seeing more or less eye to eye on equality or equity, often it's because they don't understand. And that's partly why I start with, well, what are we actually talking about? Next. Jen, can you read this for me, please?
Yeah, the biggest hurdle is that white people think they don't have to talk about race. Self-reflection stops once they conclude they're good people and not part of the solution. Whiteness is the main way race shows up in our culture, so everyone has an important role in addressing racism in America.
Thank you. I want to, I put this in here because I think that this kind of is the backdrop for everything else we're doing today. Next. Okay, so we're actually running okay on time. Oh, is that the wrong, yeah, we're on part 3 already. Wow. Okay, let's pause here. And can you shoot some questions at me? Did you see anything in the chat? Anybody have any comments? Jen, do you see anything that's
Not yet. They might be
Okay.
typing.
Okay.
So any questions or comments you wanted right now, Lee?
No, we can go on to what does DEI mean to us, because that's the meat of this hour. And
I think we're good.
okay. So Jen, can you read that?
What does DEI mean to us?
No, the next slide, sorry.
You got it. No problem. Start with conversations to understand why your organization or community lacks diversity. Acknowledge the past, the real impact of racist policies and systemic racism. Then talk about how you can invite different views, geographic, tribal, age, political, LGBTQ, etc. Show that you value DEI through awareness and action.
Thank you. So I have presented several times to rural and coastal towns where the number of minorities is so small, and this is in Washington State, hours away from Seattle. Well, guess what? The whole philanthropic community is in Seattle. All the money comes from Seattle. That drives so much of the agenda. And these wonderful service providers in small towns, they can't compete. They don't have any Black folks, very few. So if we only look at diversity in terms of race, they are completely shut out. And the reason I go work with them is because they're struggling to get the attention of funders to say, okay, you can't have that be the only metric because we're working with tribal groups. So they're looking at how they are building similar skills, but without the data and the demographics that people in a large organizations in a large city have. So let's just pause there. I'm going to back up so we're not looking at. Can you back up one slide? So during the questions, this next part is facilitated discussion that we're not looking at words. So now we're going to open up the floor to your questions, because that's why I'm here. And it's okay to ask me questions that might put me on the spot. So I want to know about what challenges are you facing on this committee, either or. What challenges, if any, are you facing around meeting this new higher goal that Amoeba has set to try to meet DEI goals as part of the mission? So two questions or just general questions that you have that could be more specific, like how to, what do I do? If no one asks, you're going to have to listen to me sing the whole time.
Roman might be trying to.
No.
No, okay, great. I just want to make sure you weren't trying to unpause or unmute yourself. I definitely don't want to put anybody on the spot. Thanks,
Okay.
Rebecca.
Okay, well, I have a question, and it's actually
part for our speaker, but part for the other attendees. At the local business institute, one of the things we do is online and on-demand education for small business owners, covering a lot of topics. We have had an outline for a class called Unity and Diversity for quite some time. And I've been doing other classes instead, but the reason I'm here today is to try and understand how an online on-demand class might help business owners work through some of these things. And our goal would be not to tell people what to do, just as we've talked about here, and Lise has pointed that out too, but to kind of lead them on a self-discovery discussion of how they feel about things and what they might choose to do. So at the end of the process, there's a little bit of, here's what we can do. And to point out a few things from my perspective, the importance of diversity is not the color of your skin or your age or any of those things. It's the perspective that those things provide that, to me, are of huge benefit to any business of any size. Is those different perspectives make us all stronger. And that's part of the point that we'll try and make. But I'd like to hear from some of the people on the call about what obstacles. Lee, you've done a great job of asking, are you comfortable? Are you confused? I think a lot of people are confused. Like, I hear these things, I see these things, I watch the news, but what am I supposed to do, right? And we too often fall into the check the box mentality when, what are we supposed to do? Oh, well, I have to have all the colors on my board, or I need more women because I have all men, or whatever the thing is. And that's kind of missing the point. It's sort of surface of checking the boxes. And one of the things we're talking about in the outline of the class is don't check the boxes, look deeper than that. But what are people grappling with? That's what I'd love to hear. And we have a quiet group.
So I'm going to jump in and say, do check the boxes, but don't stop there.
Yes, that's maybe step one, but and how do you brought up something, Lee, that I think is hugely important, and I don't know the background of a lot of the people on the call, but the whole internal external viewpoint of, are you doing this inside your company or how you appear outwards? Does somebody feel comfortable walking in your place of business? Those are two very different things. Is anybody grappling with both of those?
Yeah, Rebecca, it's Marie Ambrosia here from Atlanta, and I'm in the process of putting something together that seems to suit. The Atlanta metro area is very diverse in every possible way, and certainly multicultural. He reminded me of an event I did here in Atlanta, specifically in 1996 when the Olympics was coming here to town. And so much of Atlanta has a very downtown Atlanta, very negative response. A lot of atrocities were committed in downtown Atlanta at one time. And I thought, I got to do something, because I grew up in New York, where everybody I knew, I'm 82 years old, so I've been around the block a few times, lived in a number of cities around the country, but there, my grandparents came from Italy, and in a little town, Sheepshead Bay, Brooklyn, is where I was born and where she lived until she died. She didn't speak a lick of English, but neither did any of her neighbors, but they spoke different languages. And of course, we had this 1940 is when I was born, and we were lots of immigrants coming from all parts of the world that had been Jewish people that had come to America as a refuge. or one of the refugees around the world from Hitler. And so they didn't speak any English. But I thought the Olympics coming to a city like Atlanta, there's going to be people from all over the world that are going to come here. So I did it called Unity and Diversity, which I'm thinking might be a good thing to do as I get ready to launch something here in Atlanta. And that was in a park, downtown Atlanta, right in the heart of downtown Atlanta. And what I did was I called all of the international organizations and colleges, as well as the gay community. And we even had people from the street that came, and we celebrated the diverse cultures with music and dance and poetry. And we just and at the end, we had the Universal Dances of Peace lead us in a process. And we lit candles and sang and ended it that way. And even the policemen that were there to make sure everyone was safe, they came over and everyone just sat together and nobody minded holding hands with anyone, and no one minded anything. And we had all ages and everything. And I'm wondering, 1996 was quite a while ago. That's what, 50 years ago? And why are we visiting this again and again? And how many times before I decide to pass from this planet? Really, are we going to revisit the same thing? What is it going to take to get it? So if I'm going to, and one of the reasons that this local movement to bring us home, because living in a number of different cities, and even in New York, we had our little neighborhoods, but we went to visit each other and learned firsthand the cultures. So what's missing? You know, what is it that's missing? Do we need a celebration once a week? And then too, I've been noticing as I've become an elderly person in the community is how much emphasis and how much do we bring the generations together on a local basis to understand each other and to work together with the history of the past, not to go back. My company is actually Back to the Future. Go back to the future, but bring those values, those ideas forward to create the world that we want to see, not utopia, because we don't want to end the project. We want to build something that's better for that specific time and those specific people and minds. As we
Marie,
build.
I want to thank you, and I just want to acknowledge that there are other folks who have put stuff in the chat, and I love to continue the discussion.
No, I understand.
Okay.
I understand. Thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
you bet.
Thank you.
Okay. Do you want to say something first? Joseph had asked a question. You're welcome to unmute yourself, but he said, I understand that 66% of the employees of a company reflect the ethnicity of the owner. If true, that are we trying to do is fill in the 34%? Hopefully I said that right, Joseph. Feel free to correct me.
Well, no, I think you said it correctly. I mean, this is an interesting conversation, and it's funny, I'm from Pennsylvania, so I grew up in that group, and I'm old like Marie, so I grew up in that group. And I find what's being said is interesting, but it's also a challenge. To me, that's the issue. If, for example, if Black businesses are trying to Black communities are trying to grow and develop themselves through the utilization of Black businesses as a tool, an economic tool, then, you know, the fact that most of the employees are going to be Black, is that a sin? Or is that, how do you, this is my point about the 66%. I mean, is that a sin? Because that's what is. When I was growing up, I didn't think anything about the fact that when I went to Mr. Vigliani's store, that everybody in there was Italian. They were all the time. Hey, okay, that's good with me. As long as they served me and didn't call me names or didn't do anything stupid, we were great.
Yeah.
Okay, but it seems like we're now trying to make something out of nothing, because when I was in Pennsylvania, and I'm sure that I think it's Rebecca will agree, we had strong ethnicity. She mentioned that. You couldn't go to a town in Pennsylvania in which all of the people didn't come from Eastern Europe.
Right. That's right.
They were from Eastern, and they came from countries that no longer exist, and yet at the other hand, you still were able to get along because there was something common that you were still doing, yet at the same time you were separate. We didn't have, like in my community, the Italians had, I can't think of the name of the Saint somebody's day, and we all went to it. And then the Black people had another different kind of thing. Everybody went, but we didn't get into any discussions about this, that, or the other thing. We allowed people to be themselves, but at the same, long as they were not offensive to somebody else. And so my point to the 34% is, okay, if 66% of the employees are going to reflect the owner, then are we suggesting that the 34% be required, as being suggested, to be among all of this diverse group, that we must have this? For what purpose is the point? It gets to me, for what purpose do you do that?
Marina, you have your hand up, so I just want to let you talk. You've been trying.
Yeah. I have a little bit of an interesting perspective on that. So my name is Mariana. I'm currently the DEIA and Member Relations Manager as of like 3 days ago at the American Booksellers Association. But before that, I was a bookseller for 7 years and managed some large bookstores for the last 4 years. And this is a question that has come up time and time again at every industry conference I've gone to, but from a different perspective, a lot of owners asking, how do we hire for diversity? And so if I look at your question of why do we feel we need to fill in that 34%, it kind of makes me think of a couple interesting points. One is going back to Lee's question of thinking about internal versus external work in DEIA, what I would always tell owners and bookstore owners and managers in terms of hiring is you really have to do that work internally in your space, in your workplace, to make it accessible and safe to a diverse variety of people before you can think about hiring. Because maybe you get a resume from a really capable Black and applicant, you hire them, but if your workplace is not truly safe and equitable for them, they're going to leave pretty soon because they will feel that disparity. But on the other hand, as you said, Joseph, I don't think it's a bad thing if you have a Black-owned business that primarily has Black employees. And I think it's always important to think back to the historical context of this work and the systemic context. I think it's totally fine to have an entire Black-owned employee business because there are fewer Black-owned businesses, period, than white-owned businesses. Systemically, Black people are much less likely to get loans to open a business. So if they are able to open a business, employ only Black people, employ their community, that's great. And other businesses that are owned by people that are not from historically othered or marginalized backgrounds are the ones that should be doing the work to try to reach out to the community and hire more. That's kind of my thought on that. Yeah.
Thank you. We did have another comment, and maybe this was part of the conversation we were just having, is at what point have we gone completely wrong with DEI? Can DEI implementation be too much? I don't know if they want to elaborate.
I guess I'd ask, is the issue that this feels overwhelming and not something that you as a business owner really can have much impact or have the bandwidth for? Is that part of the question you're asking?
Or are you asking me? No, not from my perspective. My perspective is that the only objective is that there is fairness in the market, in the business and in the marketplace. You know, you can achieve that a variety of ways. You know, whether you train everybody in your business so that they are accept people, or whether they naturally do it. Because I was the only Black, well, I don't want to get into this, but quickly, I was the only Black officer of a white bank in Washington, D.C. That took some doing. Okay. And only thing that I ran into was those who didn't particularly like Black people.
Mhm.
Didn't have anything to do with the rest of the bank. you know, you would run into those people who did. And I don't know how you deal with those individuals, those small groups that run. And I've done supplier diversity for 30 years.
Mhm.
Okay. And this is, in fact, this is how DEI to me got started, out of supplier diversity rather than
Right.
employment diversity.
Right.
And it was, and that was the only problem that you ran into. You ran into some butthole that had, you know, had this false rationale that we weren't equal, or the business wasn't equal. That's what you ran into. And then they would be holding up the train from moving forward. Other than that, the train would typically keep on right on chugging along. So how do you deal with that, Lee?
Well, and I would ask, has anyone ever run into someone who has closed-minded, prejudicial attitudes like that, who doesn't also think women are inferior, who doesn't also think that LGBT is, you know, people shouldn't make choices about their sexuality and identity. There are some people who just, you are never going to agree with them. You're never going to change their mind. Hopefully have some power over them or can get away. I mean, I don't think the point of DEI is to eliminate, and I don't mean that literally, but you know, the eliminate prejudice. It's going to be, it's a part of human nature. However, I'm narrowing it down to the customers walking in your door, or the employees. Was it Mariana who talked about before? You know, this is an important issue for employers, because if you are discriminating against LGBT customers or employees, you're going to get written up in a social media post or Glassdoor or something. It's going to impact your business. So that's why I say check the boxes. Just like before you go for a run, you're going to stretch your muscles and warm them up. Don't stop at checking the boxes. Internalize that process is my recommendation, because if DEI does not come from the top, everybody knows it's not, you know, you can add it on from HR, but it's to me, it's not icing on the cake, it's the foundation, it's the cake. Because it's an aspect of everything, it's so much an aspect of everything else that you do in your business. So, you know, it just seems like everybody can work on some piece of this. Again, I'm assuming people in the room are not right now, are not saying, you know, I think this is a bunch of nonsense, and, you know, I'm going to discriminate against anybody I want, and I don't care. And that's not my market. I don't, people like that, I'm not going to change their mind. They're never going to, the problem is the media gives so much attention to the few number of people who are so prejudiced and are trying to make things difficult for all kinds of people. So there's a perception that that's, you know, a whole lot more people than I believe statistically it already is, because guess what? Treating people poorly and being disrespectful, it's bad for business. No matter how or why you do it, it's bad for business, short-term or long-term, and both.
And I just want to acknowledge we're about 5 minutes in. That last comment, I really appreciate that Joseph answered, but Angelica asked it. I want to read Arno's, and then I want to give Mariana and others who are looking to say something else. Also know this is only the beginning. This is not meant to be like, oh, bye-bye. So definitely keep in touch with me, because it's a big, big topic. Arno had mentioned in our experience, inviting different views is often not working. People with a different lived experience are not looking for a place at the table. If they feel they have an away game at our table, they are right to wanting to shape the table. We have had to learn a lot by joining other tables. For example, attending and supporting events of BIPOC organizations.
Yes, good.
Yeah, that I if I can jump in.
Sure, go for it.
It's not, yeah, I would highly agree with that. I would even say for anyone who's looking to launch initiatives or businesses or working on expanding businesses with this DEI lens, you know, I think it was Marie who was asking, you know, what do we have to do to go back to these values we once had, et cetera. I think it's really important when looking to start something new to always look to the communities that are already doing that work. Very often BIPOC, other disability groups, queer and trans groups have been doing that work for a long time. And I think, Lee, you had a point to that maybe, and then don't invent the wheel slide of remember that other people from those communities are very likely doing that work already. So being able to, you know, respectfully engage with them and listen and not talk and just take in what they're doing and see how you can support is a great way to get involved in that community, get more connected, learn more, bring in those customers, you know, especially when it comes to a business. If people start to realize, oh, that business has been participating in this, you know, racial justice roundtable that keeps happening once a month, maybe I'll go check them out now, because I wasn't sure before, but now I will. You know, it'll still bring people in. And then the only other point I wanted to make was in response to the question of at what point have we gone completely wrong with DEI? Can it be too much? If what you were thinking is kind of at what point does it go too far? At what point are we misguided? I just want to reiterate something that I always try to keep in mind, which is that when it comes to DEI, everything is so connected. A lot of it can go back to really thinking about racial inequity. But when you start talking about racial inequity, you're going to start looking at socioeconomic inequity. You're going to start looking at lack of access and how neighborhoods have been built out in a way that makes some poorer than others because of freeways. And you're just going to lift other people up. So if it's, you know, for example, if we keep lifting up this marginalized group, what happens to this group that people don't think is marginalized? Then
can I jump in, because I think you hit on something I really wanted to say. I think this is as much political, if not more political, than it is in reality. As long as Black people were the only enemy, you could get by. And then Hispanics started, the numbers started blowing up. And so what it is, everybody's trying to get a seat at the table. So they want their voice to be heard, because there was no such thing as LBQ. I mean, it was gay, and then it moved to something else. And that's people trying to get their seat at the table so that they can get that. Then they wanted to be diverse. Well, how can you be a minority? Excuse me, not diverse. They wanted to be a minority. Well, how can you be a minority if you didn't have the ethnicity that grounded you in that ability? You can't be a minority just because you are of a different gender. And that to me, but they bring this to the table. But so corporate America and the government decided, let's not get into a fight about which one. We're going to come up with a term, inclusiveness and all this kind of stuff, put everybody in the bucket. It's the same thing that they always do. We're not going to increase the slice of the pie. We're just going to make everybody in the pie so that they can get in there and act like we're doing something. And that's, to me, that's what happened. All of a sudden, everybody, whatever group comes along that wishes their space now is a part of the diverse reality. And we haven't fixed anything in the diverse reality. We just included more people to make the conversation seem to actually get you lost in the conversation.
I don't disagree with you, Joseph, but I do know that part of what's going on is the government has standards that are You're right. I agree with you about the private sector, but that's why I think about sectors a lot. And I do want you to take a second to write some notes to give Jen feedback, if you would, please. But part of what's driving this, and bucket, as you call it, is that the government, state of Washington is an example I know best. I mean, there are some very rigorous standards that they are trying to meet because they are trying to make up for inequities of tax-paying citizens. So that's partly why this is a big, mushy issue. There are different sectors with different agendas, and I think there always will be.
I agree with you on that.
And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but this is a sticky wicket. It's a large topic. It's 11 o'clock. I don't want to keep you past. I really appreciate everyone for coming. If you could, and Jen, can I have the next slide, please? Just keep in mind, don't wait for the equity fairy. She may not show for you. So try to do some work yourself. Thank you very much. And email me if you have questions, and I would love to continue the discussion with you.
And thank you, everybody, for being here. And like I said, we're definitely going to continue the conversation. And I appreciate you all being here today.